Today we're going to talk about the rise of totalitarianism in the 1920s and 1930s. So this chart has a lot of information about totalitarianism, and I'm going to go over what I consider to be the most important practices that you can write down in your notes. So the first thing is that totalitarianism is really in the name. You see the word total. So it's wanting total control over people in a certain country. The first characteristic I would write down is that the state is more important than the individual. The state is more important than the individual. So totalitarian leaders told people to give up their rights for the benefit of their state or to promote or improve their state. There's usually one political party and one leader, one political party and only one leader. The government controls all aspects of daily life, and we're going to look at how that kind of plays out. And citizens are supposed to give up their rights for the good of their country. So we're going to look at some different leaders and how they displayed these characteristics. So we're going to start with the rise of Mussolini and fascism in Italy. Many people in Italy were disappointed that Italy did not gain territory as a result of the Paris Peace Conference. And economic issues like high inflation, high unemployment, cause people to lose faith in the democratically elected government. So what that means is people have a government that they feel like is not really doing anything to fix the problems, especially the economic problems that they're facing, and so they look for an alternative. And Benito Mussolini founded the Fascist Party in 1919 in Italy. Here are the beliefs of fascism, and you'll see that they're similar to the beliefs of totalitarianism. So loyalty to the state above all else. So people are encouraged to sacrifice individual rights for the good of the state. Loyalty and obedience to a strong leader. And they combine nationalism with strong authority. So the nationalism part kind of means that people want to have pride in their nation. And in the nations that felt humiliated after World War I or who lost World War I, these leaders promised to rebuild that pride or nationalism, and people really responded to that, and that attracted people. So Mussolini was a newspaper editor and politician, and his popularity increased as he criticized the ineffectiveness of Italy's government. The Fascist Party began attacking communists and socialists, and he attacked labor unions, saying that they were going to start a communist revolution, and so that helped him gain more support from business owners and the upper class. So in terms of conditions after World War I, the economic problems, fears of communism, all of those things helped him rise to power. And in October 1922, Mussolini and 30,000 fascists marched on Rome and were allowed to form a government by King Victor Emmanuel. So the tactics that Mussolini used to implement a totalitarian state. He outlawed all political parties except the Fascist Party and got rid of democracy. He used a secret police that jailed political opponents. He also used censorship, so newspapers and radio could only broadcast fascist messages. And he also outlawed workers' unions. In 1935, Mussolini attacked Ethiopia, and the symbolism of this is that, remember, Italy had tried to conquer Ethiopia back in the time of imperialism in the 1800s, and they had been unsuccessful. And so the symbolism of this is that Mussolini is restoring Italy to greatness, and now they're powerful enough to go and attack this other country and take it over. This action was condemned by the League of Nations, but the League of Nations didn't really have much power, and so this didn't do a lot of good. The Rome-Berlin axis is an axis that Mussolini made with Hitler in 1936, and so they're allied based on their similar beliefs of fascism and totalitarianism. The next totalitarian leader is Joseph Stalin of the Soviet Union. So remember that Russia during World War I underwent a communist revolution, and they became a communist country called the Soviet Union. So Stalin came to power in the Soviet Union because he was party general secretary. So even before he was the leader, when they still had Lenin as their leader, Stalin's position as party general secretary allowed him to appoint friends to important party positions. So he was able to appoint a lot of people into the Soviet government who were loyal to him. And then after Lenin died, he was able to seize power. The other person who was vying for power was Leon Trotsky, who was the leader of the Red Guard, but he was forced into exile and later murdered, probably by Joseph Stalin. One of Stalin's goals when he took over the Soviet Union was to rapidly industrialize. So we learned about how Russia was slow to industrialize compared to a lot of other nations, and now Stalin really wants to change that. And so he set what are called 5-year plans. A 5-year plan is just like every 5 years we're going to produce this much stuff as we industrialize. So it set targets for producing things such as steel, coal, oil, and electricity. How was this successful, or how successful was it? It was successful in that it did produce more steel, coal, oil, and electricity. It was not successful because it didn't produce enough of the products that people need for daily life, such as consumer goods. So think about all the things that you would buy or your family buys at like Walmart, H-E-B, Target, wherever, like the kind of stuff that you need for daily life. The Soviet Union wasn't producing enough of that stuff, and so there were shortages of housing, food, clothing, and other daily necessities. So they did increase their industrialization, but it harmed the average person. Stalin's other major economic policy was collectivization. Collectivization was aimed at changing the way that farming was done in the Soviet Union to bring it under communist control. So what collectivization did was it said, if you're a farmer, you no longer own that land. Now the government owns it, and you're still going to be a farmer, but you're going to go work on a large collective farm where you're paid by the government. And so the government seized 25 million private farms, and the farmers were supposed to move on to collective government-owned farms and still work. Now, the peasants in Russia really resisted this because they didn't want to give up their land and kind of their freedom to be their own boss and have their own farm. And so a lot of peasants resisted. A lot of them had to be forcibly moved onto the collective farms. Other people destroyed food, or they killed their livestock to prevent the government from seizing it. And so this rebellion against collectivization resulted in shortages of food and a famine that ended up killing between 5 to 10 million people, either through starvation or through people being executed who resisted collectivization. So Stalin used a lot of different tactics to implement a totalitarian state. He used secret police. The secret police would tap people's phones, read mail, spy undercover among people. He also used terror. Millions of people were arrested and executed for opposing or even speaking against Stalin. So if you live in a society where you know any sort of criticism that you make against the government, even like privately, could be held against you, it really creates fear in people, and people are reluctant to want to criticize. Some people were executed. Some people were sent to gulags in Siberia, which are labor camps. Stalin also used a policy called the Great Purge, where he got rid of all the people in the Communist Party who opposed him. So there were people from way back when the Soviet Union started, like in the time of Lenin, who didn't like Stalin and didn't think that he should have been the leader after Lenin. And so he got rid of those people, or purged them from the Communist Party. This is an image of the gulags in Siberia. So you could be sent here if you're an enemy of the state, and you would be worked really hard. A lot of people never came back from the gulags, and they died of the harsh conditions there. So there's a lot of different ways that the Soviet Union controlled everyday life, and you can just choose to list maybe 3 examples. In the Soviet Union, you were assigned a job, and you must report to your job or you would be arrested. They had youth programs that kind of think about like Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, but communist, where they taught people communist ideas. They used a lot of propaganda through art, posters, radio, and newspapers. Stalin even developed a new art style called Socialist Realism, which I'll talk about on another slide. They used censorship, so only things that promoted the Communist Party could be published or broadcast. And they also used religious persecution. This is something that's common to most communist countries, where they want to try to get rid of religion, like regardless of what religion it is. The idea behind that is that if you're devoted to God, or whatever religion you're devoted to, you can't be fully devoted to the state. And so in communist countries, they almost want your religion to be like the government, and devotion and loyalty to the government. And so they try to stop religion. So in this case, in Russia, it was the Russian Orthodox Church. They tried to eliminate its influence among the people. Here are some examples of Socialist Realism, which was that new artistic style. So Socialist Realism tried to show an idealized version of what life in the Soviet Union was really like. So Stalin was a brutal dictator, but here we see a painting of him like receiving flowers and being nice to children. In the painting at the top right, we see people having lots of food, having a big feast, where in reality we know there were shortages of food in the Soviet Union. At the bottom, we see these women marching off to work on the collective farm, and they look pretty happy and well-fed. In reality, we know that that was not the case, and the peasants often resisted collectivization. So it's an artistic style that aimed to show an idealized version of Soviet life. Stalin was also a master of propaganda. So here we have a poster of him like leading the world, that the communist revolution is going to spread and take over everything. Here we have another poster of him, and the wheel says CCCP, which is like USSR in Russian. So here we have Stalin as like the captain of the ship, as this great leader. Here's a propaganda poster, and it's translated, "Briskly, full speed ahead. Complete 5-year commitments in 4 years." So think about for a minute which of Stalin's policies this would be promoting. And the answer is 5-year plans. So we want to complete 5-year commitments. We also see people engaged in heavy industry, like maybe making steel or something like that, which is part of the 5-year plan. Here we have a propaganda poster where the red book is titled 5-Year Plan, and you can see the evil capitalist, he looks kind of creepy and evil, says fantasy, nonsense, utopia. And then there's banners, industrialization and collectivization of farms, and at the bottom, he's kind of embarrassed that the Soviet Union is doing so well economically. So it's against capitalism. Here's another one promoting for young people through the youth organizations to become educated and be major contributors to the communist state. So think about if you lived in a country like this where these were the only sources of information you had access to. So it's easy for us today to look at this and think, I wouldn't be influenced by that. But we have a lot of different sources of news in our country. In the Soviet Union, this was the only way you could get information, was through the official government sources and propaganda. So here are some additional ways that Stalin controlled everyday life. Education became universal, and in communist countries, they didn't do this because they were like being nice and they wanted everyone to be educated. It's because they want to, number one, teach communist ideas in school, and number two, if they're going to rapidly industrialize, they need everyone to be educated and like be able to read and write and do basic math for all the new jobs that industrialization creates. They also improved the position of women, kind of. So officially, women in communist countries, including the Soviet Union, had rights equal to men. This, again, is not because they want to be nice to women. This is because in order to meet like the 5-year plans and goals of production, they need women to work just as much as men. And so by granting them rights, at least on paper, it encouraged women to do that. Now, I would argue in these countries, no one had rights. So even though on paper they say women have equal rights, men don't have rights either. So it's kind of a moot point, not really, they're not granting rights to anyone. And a statistic to think about, Stalin is generally considered to have been responsible for the deaths of about 40 million people through all of his policies of oppression, through the famine, through executions, all of those different things. The last totalitarian leader we're going to look at is Adolf Hitler. He was born in Austria, and he wanted to become an artist but was rejected from art school. And as a young man, he moved to Vienna, Austria, and was exposed to political rhetoric, including anti-Semitism. So a lot of the ideas that we know him for were really popular in Austria at the time, and he was exposed to those during that time. He also fought in World War I, and this is a photograph of him on the far right in World War I. So the Nazi Party was formed in 1919, and Hitler did not found that party, but he became a member. In what ways was Germany humiliated by World War I? So you might remember that Germany was humiliated. They had to pay from the Treaty of Versailles a lot of reparations. They had to demilitarize. They had to give up territory. They also had to sign the War Guilt Clause, which said that they had caused World War I, when we know really that's not really the case. Economic conditions in Germany following World War I, they faced very high inflation, unemployment, and then when the Great Depression hit, of course, they were really struggling with that too. So how would these lead people to join a party like the Nazis? People had not enough food. They don't have jobs. They're really, really struggling in Germany. And so when a new government comes along that promises to fix all of those economic issues, that was really attractive to people. And that's really what attracted people initially to the Nazi Party. So after World War I, Hitler lived in Munich, Germany, and he joined the Nazi Party. This is the German version of the Fascist Party, and it promoted the idea that parliamentary democracy had failed, that the government that they had currently, which was elected, was not doing anything to fix all the economic problems of Germany, and they needed an alternative. And so Hitler did not found this party, but he rose to prominence in the party because he was a very effective public speaker, and also was a good organizer, and drew a lot of people to the Nazi Party. So at one point, Hitler led a failed revolt against the government and was arrested and served time in jail. While he was in jail for 9 months, he wrote a book called Mein Kampf, which means My Struggle. So Mein Kampf is the book that outlined all of Hitler's basic ideas that we know him for, like fascism, anti-Semitism, social Darwinism, and racism. He also talked about the Aryan race. So Hitler had this idea that there was this white Northern European race of people that he called Aryan, that were the most superior race in the world. And other races of people, which he considered Jews, Slavs, and Gypsies, were inferior races, and that they should be eliminated. He also said that the Treaty of Versailles had been really detrimental to Germany, and that it was an outrage, it had been really unfair, and that he wanted to regain the territory that Germany had lost as a result of World War I. He also promised to conquer Eastern Europe to give Germans more space. So one of the groups that he identified as inferior, the Slavs, Slavic people are people from Eastern Europe, and so he wanted to take over that territory and conquer the Eastern Europeans. So Hitler left prison in 1924, and a lot of Germans initially ignored the ideas of the Nazi Party. Like, it was, people joined it, but it wasn't extremely popular until the Great Depression hit. When Americans withdrew loans from Europe following the stock market crash, Germany's economy collapsed. Factories and banks closed, and they had a 30% unemployment rate by 1932. Think about that for a minute. The unemployment rate in America right now is around 4 or 5%. It's very low. Think about if a third of the people in America were unemployed, which is what happened during the Great Depression, but also in Germany. It really would cause people to question what, the status quo and what was going on. So people are wondering, why isn't our government fixing this? Why aren't they doing more to help people? And so that's what people in Germany started questioning, and that led the Nazis to gain more power. So by kind of preying on people's fears about the Depression and economic issues, the Nazis gained more followers and became the largest political party in Germany. So sometimes you hear people say that Hitler came to power legally, and what they mean is that Germany still had a democracy at this point, and the Nazi Party got the most representatives in the Reichstag, which was like the Congress of Germany. And so once they did that, Hitler was appointed chancellor. And once he had the majority Nazis in the Reichstag, which again is like their Congress or legislature, they would pass laws that were favorable to the Nazis. And so one of those laws that they passed was called the Enabling Act. The Enabling Act was a law that gave Hitler unlimited power for 4 years to handle the problems of the Great Depression. So it said we're going to suspend the Constitution. The problems of the Great Depression are so severe that we need to deal with this. And so we're going to give more power to the government to handle those issues. What the Enabling Act did was pretty much allow Hitler to do whatever he wanted. So once he had this position of power, then he took it even further and did a lot of the terrible things that he's known for. So once the Enabling Act was passed, Germany was turned into a totalitarian state under Hitler. He suspended the Constitution. All political parties were outlawed except the Nazi Party. Political opponents, anybody who opposed them, could be arrested. And they also formed a police force called the SS. So on your paper, it has what tactics did Hitler use to implement a totalitarian state. You can say the SS was a police force who arrested political opponents. And already by 1934, millions of people were arrested as a result of this. The next thing he used was the Gestapo. So the SS is like a regular police force where they're visible and people know who they are. The Gestapo was a secret police force. So they wore plain clothes, not police uniforms, and that really caused fear in society because if you don't necessarily know who the Gestapo are and they can be listening to any kind of conversation you have, it would cause people to be very reluctant to criticize the government because if somebody hears it, you could be arrested. They banned labor unions and strikes. They put people to work on public works projects like factories, highways, weapons, and the military. So this is something that the Nazis had promised to do to help fix the issues of the Great Depression, and they really did do that. So like in the United States, they put people to work building public works projects. So like you could go work for the government and like build a new highway or work in a factory to produce more weapons. And so the fact that they did provide jobs for people caused even more people to support them. They also used censorship and propaganda, and we're going to look at some examples of that. But propaganda through radio, movies, art, and literature. So just like I said in the Soviet Union, we have to remember we think today, oh, we wouldn't be influenced by that. But if that's all you saw and your only options for like movies or listening to the radio were Nazi promoted things, like it would influence you over time generally, and most people were influenced over time. They also had youth organizations. So children had to join the Hitler Youth where they learned all the Nazi ideas. They got military training, physical fitness, things like that. All right, so Hitler's key beliefs, you can just list them, and then I'll talk about what each one is, but on your paper you can just make a list. So anti-Semitism is hatred or hostility towards Jews. Hitler blamed the Jews for the problems that Germany had been experiencing since World War I, a lot of the economic problems. He used the Jews as a scapegoat. Social Darwinism and racism. So social Darwinism promotes the idea that certain races are superior. He said that the Aryan race was superior and other races like Eastern Europeans and Jews were inferior. Fascism. Fascism emphasizes total devotion to the state and that people should sacrifice their rights for the greatness of their country. And totalitarianism uses terror and other tactics to control all aspects of life, so total control of everyday life. This slide just lists enemies of the Nazi state, and I like to include this just because I'm sure most of you know about the Holocaust and that we mostly talk about Jews and the Holocaust, but there were other groups that were persecuted by the Nazis as well. So like communists, people in trade unions, homosexuals, people who didn't want to fight, who were pacifists. So there's different groups of people besides Jews who were targeted by the Nazis, even though we talk about Jews the most, and rightfully so, because so many of them were killed in the Holocaust. So tactics that Hitler used against Jews, there were a lot, and we'll just go over a few examples. In 1933, the Nuremberg laws were passed, taking rights away from Jews. So it took citizenship away from German Jews. It prohibited marriage between Jews and non-Jews. Over time, the Nazis also limited what Jews could do, like they couldn't attend public school, they couldn't shop in certain stores. Gradually, they put more and more limits on Jews. In 1939, Kristallnacht occurred. Kristallnacht means Night of Broken Glass. And this is a night when Nazi mobs went around and attacked Jewish homes, stores, and synagogues and started rounding up Jewish men and deporting them to concentration camps. And so these are just some photographs of the destruction perpetrated on Kristallnacht. Over time, Jews were also made to carry special ID cards and wear Stars of David on their clothing, identifying them as Jewish. So Hitler was really a master of propaganda, and he used the latest technology at the time, including radio and film, which is, again, I know, kind of old-fashioned to us, but most people in this time period had a radio in their home that they would listen to, and just like a family might get together today and watch TV, people would get around and listen to the programs on the radio. And so by using those, he really infiltrated all different parts of people's lives. And the links here to the speeches I'll try to post separately because they're not linked in this PowerPoint, but I'll try to post those in addition. So here are some examples of Nazi propaganda. In this one, you can see the hand is punching Joseph Stalin in the face. So this is an anti-communist poster. Here's one promoting Hitler as a great leader who's going to lead the nation of Germany to greatness. This one is promoting all the good things that the Nazi Party and their charities have done for people, like protecting children and fighting poverty and giving back to the community. So trying to promote the Nazi Party as like a really giving organization. Here are some anti-Semitic posters that tell lies about Jews. There's also one promoting an anti-Semitic film. And if you look at the facial features, I mean, they make the Jews look like evil and kind of outsiders, and that's the image that Hitler wanted to portray. This one promotes the Hitler Youth Organization for girls, where again, it's sort of like Girl Scouts, but Nazi, where they promote Nazi ideas and physical fitness and like readiness for war. Here's another one of Hitler leading the nation, and the eagle in the background and the swastika on the flag were two really important Nazi symbols that they used in a lot of their propaganda. They also held rallies every year called the Nuremberg rallies, and you can see like thousands and thousands of people would come to these, and they'd have speeches by Hitler and other important leaders, and it would just like generate support and get people excited about the Nazi Party. In 1939, Hitler signed the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact, and this basically said that Hitler and Stalin were not going to attack each other. Now, you may be thinking, if you paid attention, this sounds weird because Hitler and Mussolini were very anti-communist, and that's true. I would say the reason that this was signed is because Hitler was a liar. He never intended to abide by this, but he wanted Joseph Stalin to not attack him, because one of Hitler's plans in World War II is that he's going to conquer Eastern Europe because he believed they're inferior people. But if he starts to conquer Eastern Europe and he's getting closer and closer to Russia, Soviet Union, that's going to make Stalin want to attack him. And so by having this agreement, it said that they're going to conquer Eastern Europe and then divide it between Germany and the Soviet Union. Hitler never intended to give any of that territory to the Soviet Union. But by signing this agreement, it bought him time where he could come in and take over Eastern Europe and not have Stalin attack him. So that's really the idea behind the Nazi-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact. So that's a quick overview of the three main totalitarian leaders you need to know: Mussolini, Stalin, and Hitler.